You are listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network.
وتلمين هناك لشوارزنيجر
Pegarle Ronaldinho Gaucho. Ya lo hacen. Pierna derecha, directo al arco. ¡Golazo! 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 ¡Golazo!
This is Soccer Today, live on SPN Radio, your new live show about the beautiful game in all its glory, with Duane, Rollins and Kevin Laramee. MLS, EPL, La Liga, Champions League, all is fair game. Powered by the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us at sportspodcastingnetwork.com.
And welcome to day one of MLS Cup final week here in the city of Toronto. Kevin will join me here soon enough, but he's in Montreal for today.
Yes.
Joining us on the line in Edmonton is Steven Sandor. How you doing, Steven?
Hoping this Arctic front we're having is not going to, it's heading east slowly. I hope it's not going to get to Toronto in time for this weekend. But yeah, hopefully that you guys are going to have a decent winter weather, enough to give Toronto home advantage, but not cold enough to hurt the fans.
I had a look today, Stephen. The forecast, Environment Canada's forecast, which is the one I would choose over all others, has picking it at around freezing, so around zero. That's not too bad if it stays there. Most Americans listening to this might shudder when they think of that, especially if they're in the south. But for us up here, 0 Celsius, 32 Fahrenheit isn't too bad.
In December, it's wonderful. It's going to be a wonderful winter evening. That's what I hope. You hope that it's just a little bit blustery, because I think Toronto is used to playing in those conditions at BMO Field, even though I haven't been there since the new stands went up, so I don't know how that affect the wind tunnel that used to be in that stadium. So
it's a little less windy, but we'll have lots of time to talk about the weather moving on. There is a breaking story. We wanted to have Stephen on because he's an NASL insider in many ways. Of course, FC Edmonton, the color commentator up there, does great work with plastic pitch as well. Stephen, start with FC Edmonton's story in this. We're seeing all of these moving parts in NASL right now, and even some suggestion that the league may go up this week. You're telling me off air, maybe you can sort of expand this for the listeners, you're not hearing much in Edmonton right now. What is the feeling around FC Edmonton, considering all of this turmoil in NASL?
I'm going to tell you right now, in Edmonton and likely probably all of Alberta, the only media who's paying attention to the NASL's trouble is me. Obviously during hockey season here, you're not going to get people paying much attention outside anyways. But the fact is the ticket sales are up. In fact, I know that on Friday they sold 100 season tickets. On Saturday they sold another bunch of season tickets. Their season tickets are already well past where they were last year. People are having a big buzz about the team's success last year, and no one's talking about the league issues at all. The general perception here is everything's going full on forward. And Tom Fath, reiterated that Friday that they're going to play in whatever the NASL is this year. And Tom is, probably the most outside the Indy 11, Tom Fath, Edmonton's the face of the FC Edmonton, the ownership, because him and his brother own the team, but Tom Fath is basically the one who always speaks, is the hardest loyalists of NASL. So those two have just really sort of backed this league and said that they're going to keep going. And they gave Colin Miller, the coach, a 3-year extension on Friday. I mean, nothing says, hey, everything is fine, than committing long-term on a contract to your coach, who still had a year left on it. They tore that up and they gave him a 3-year extension. So they are trying in every way to exude that they are the most stable franchise of the NASL stable. And I think they are right now. And I think, 6 months ago, no one would have pictured it. They would have said, oh, FC Edmonton's attendance, the stadium, the issues and such. There's no way that they're going to be the team that's sort of holding NASL together, or what's left of it together. But really, that's, the odd part of it. That's really what it's become. And I think if there is an NASL that does play in 2017, and I think that with Miami, Indy, San Francisco, and Edmonton, you have those base of 4 who don't necessarily want to leave and really have nowhere to go. And we can get to that later. That you still may have that base. We'll find out Tuesday after these USSF meetings. I don't think the USSF deep down inside wants to see any team torpedoed, despite what the conspiracy theorists think. I think, they want to see healthy clubs all over America. And again, that doesn't really include FC Edmonton. I don't really think the USSF cares about FC Edmonton one iota, but they do care about some of the other clubs I mentioned. So the fact is we'll see what happens. But if there is an NASL in 2017, I think a lot of thanks or a lot of credit or discredit, depending on how you think of it, has to go to Tom Fath, who is, quickly becoming what I think North America wide, one of the vanguards of soccer at the lower division level.
Let's talk about him and Tom Fath and his attraction, his association, his affiliation, his desire to keep this league afloat when the rest of the continent seems to be sort of fleeing as fast as they can in many ways from this league. What is it about his association with this league that has made him so loyal to it, in your opinion?
Well, I think that he was in on the ground floor. Remember, Tom Fath is actually the only original owner left that from that group in 2011 that played the first, full NASL season apart from that USSF mixed league they had, I think, in 2010. But when FC Edmonton started, of all that group from the original NASL, he's the only original owner left. He has, there's shares involved in ownership of NASL, clearly, that are a big issue as well. And as well, let's be frank here. In terms of, and I'm going to put the Canadian Premier League aside here because that's not a 2017 entity. Where else is Edmonton going to play? That's the key question here. Edmonton needs a home to play. They need to show stability, and they need opponents. They need a league to play in. NASL is there might be a USL, but everything I've been told is the USL doesn't really want Edmonton, and the reasons are very strong. I mean, the USL sells itself as one is Edmonton aren't an American team, so they're not obligated in that sort of USSF sort of thing to deal with it. And it's not like Ottawa, where Ottawa is a quick run to Montreal, Toronto, the Northeast United States, and the Midwest of the United States. The Edmonton is far away from everything. Everyone has to fly to Edmonton. Everybody in the Western Conference would have to fly to Edmonton. And teams like in Texas, it's a 3.5-hour flight, 4-hour flight. Not a lot of direct flights to Edmonton. So meaning a lot of teams have to connect. And just to give you an example of how hard it can be to connect out of Edmonton, I was trying to get to Indy before I got sick and had to miss a month. But I was planning to go to Indy for the semifinal. The best I could find through all the travel sites was a 4-legged excursion that would take me 16 hours to get to Indianapolis, where you get to the point where you're like, I'm better off driving from Edmonton to Indiana. So it's the travel issues would be huge. So Edmonton really needs the NASL right now, and the NASL needs Edmonton. And whatever happens the next couple of days, and if you're listening to this on Wednesday, everything I could say could be horribly out of date. But the fact is, as of today, that's where we stand. And the feeling is, in Edmonton, again, talking to the club, they're extremely confident that the NASL will play in 2017. The confidence is almost bizarre in terms of the fact that how much it stands out from everything else you hear. I mean, I talked to Mark Dos Santos in San Francisco, and he was sort of like, I hope everything's going to be okay with the league. I understand we're going through some dark times. That's not what you hear out of Edmonton. Edmonton's full steam ahead. Everything's good.
Speaking of things that could be outdated by Wednesday, the New York Cosmos, are they going to continue to exist in the next few hours, in your opinion, Stephen?
I would have said probably even last week that I think there would have been some white knight that would come in. The brand means something. But I think as stories crept out about how much this team's in debt, I don't know if those numbers are true. I do know this, and I'm going to speak on the New York Cosmos, Miami FC side. I know in speaking to their players who played in MLS and NASL, who played for both the Cosmos or Miami FC, because it's true with both teams, they have said that they're treated better at the Cosmos and Miami FC than they were with their MLS sides. In terms of, that's just how much money the teams were spending in terms of everything from facilities to getting players around, to try to make the flights better, because let's face it, both leagues don't charter. But in terms of, I mean, New York used to send a full staff with the team. We used to marvel at, because this is not something you see in lower division soccer. When in Edmonton, New York would send everybody, the full PR people, the full coaching staff, the medics, the trainer, everyone went. And it was a big trip. It was a fully major league kind of trip that you would see from those teams. They are at a different level. Both those teams present massive problems, as will the Tampa Bay Rowdies. And the Tampa Bay Rowdies are in USL, and we will wait and see. We'll wait and see. But those teams would present similar problems, as in, if they were to survive and let's say go to the USL, you can't stop an NASL owner from being an NASL owner in USL. USL has no salary cap that I know of, do they? So how is USL going to feel if Miami FC is paying a guy or has a payroll higher than 6 or 7 of the MLS teams, which was the case last year? They're paying some guys $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 a year. How are the other USL owners going to feel about that, especially when Tampa Bay does it? Because Tampa Bay is going to do it. Tampa Bay spent some crazy money. They didn't get Joe Cole for nothing last year. So those are going to be huge issues going forward. But New York, I think, has got too much baggage. I think in a perfect world, if there was a way to fold the current team and then tweak the name, whereas and you took the copyright, like, the classic, let's call it Cosmos FC, or Cosmos of New York FC, to take the trademark without really taking the trademark, and, tweak it a little bit, tone down the green just a little bit. I think that you could make it work. I think the name means something. I'd be the first one to say that MLS should have tried to figure this out in the 1990s to get that trademark or to buy that trademark and use that instead of Metro Stars or what have you. That would have been the way to go to build soccer in New York, but they didn't, or weren't able to. But the name means something. I don't know necessarily if a team without a stadium for next year, as is the case right now, and not selling tickets is worth that much. So we'll see what goes on. I mean, stranger things have happened. I've come to, and I say this, and I'm going, it's a long-winded answer. And I tell people this when people say there's the death of this league or the death of that league. Go back 6 years. Remember, we would be having a talk like this, except it would be the USL we'd be talking about. How everyone was moving to NASL. Joey Saputo had said that's it with the USL. Greg Kerfoot had said that was it with the USL. Everyone who was anyone in lower division soccer went to form the NASL, and we were all saying the USL is dead. Funny how things work. And I've learned to expect the absolute unexpected in lower division. I think I've seen it all. Well, I think, actually I haven't. And that's the crazy thing. I know I haven't seen it all, but I've seen so much in lower division soccer over the years that, nothing really shocks me anymore in terms of what could happen. Some investor comes out of nowhere, some money is loaned out of nowhere, or teams go belly up. Or teams are reformed after going belly up. I don't even know anymore. So, I have a feeling that what's going to happen by Wednesday will be something none of us have ever thought of, whether it means leagues die, merge, get together. I have no idea, but it probably something none of us have ever, a scenario none of us could have fathomed.
You mentioned the USL. A lot of rumblings right now. Ottawa Fury announced a month and a half ago that it would be moving down to USL. And now, since last week, there's rumors in Montreal that FC Montreal might be relocation. It's going to change its vocation, change the way they approach the business and soccer operations as a separate. In the last few hours, there's a rumor that FC Montreal could become the Ottawa Fury. The Impact would be taking care of the soccer operations and the business operation by the Ottawa Sport and Entertainment Group. What can you tell us about that rumor as well, Stephen?
It's a rumor right now, and I mean, it's a rumor that is really fresh. And I mean, really fresh. And I think, it starts with the word. And I mean, I think the sources are very reliable out of Montreal. The people that are talking about it are people I consider very reliable about FC Montreal moving. Now, let's face it, USL has an issue. And the USL's biggest issue that they need to deal with is the number 2 teams and the so-called TFC2, bunch of Whitecaps 2, Sounders 2, all of those things that are those teams that are basically, clearly run as developmental organizations, and no team, and I mean this to Montreal's credit, not to their detraction, is run as much as a developmental team as FC Montreal. I mean, they take their lumps, they lose a lot of games, but they play a lot of kids, and they play a lot of Canadian kids at very young ages, and they're seriously throwing them in to get their feet wet, to clearly get them experience where wins and losses aren't as important. And that's a problem for the USL. Because if the USL is trying to sell itself as this competitive league, they can't have clearly developmental teams. Like these so-called affiliated teams have got to be more competitive as well. They can't play in the other facility in front of a couple of hundred fans. And in case of Toronto and Montreal, which they did a couple of times this year, play on Wednesday afternoons, right? I mean, if you're the Rochester Rhinos and you're trying to sell your game to your fans and you're playing at TFC2 or FC Montreal in front of a dozen people in what they see as a community park. I mean, it's not a community park, but if you watch on TV, it looks like one. On a Wednesday afternoon, how do you sell that your league is fully professional? And this is a huge issue. I think, let's face it, in Europe, people don't go watch they don't watch the B teams. Like, you can go for almost nothing to see Man City's B team or Arsenal's B team, play each other because no one cares. And if they don't care there, why would we think that our fans would care to watch Whitecaps 2 or in large numbers, TFC2 or FC Montreal? The North American model is going to be the one that has to be followed, I think, eventually, where if you're going to have affiliate teams, they've got to be true sort of like farm teams, like they are in baseball and hockey. They play in another market. They're affiliated. They have their own name, their own culture, and they create that. Now, if a deal with Ottawa Fury would do that, and I've heard nothing that confirms this, and I need to be clear, like this weekend, we know the CSA looked at the thing, and the CSA has told me the Fury's application, was looked at the board meeting, and there should be an announcement sometime midweek where they sort of summarize everything that they are going over with the Fury's application to move to USL. I would think that if that would happen, it would have to be in there. But again, it's a rumor. It's not confirmed. And I don't want to get ahead of that because I don't want to say that, this is anything more than it is. I certainly think if it was something that was to happen, I honestly think that it would tick off a lot of people in Ottawa because the biggest part of that is if you're an affiliated team, no Voyageurs Cup. We know that, right? That's the regulations as it stands right now. Affiliated teams not allowed in. So that would mean that if FC Edmonton plays, they go right away to play Toronto FC in that first round, which, honestly would be the best thing for FC Edmonton. I mean, the buzz, if Toronto, if as an MLS Cup finalist and maybe MLS Cup winner, would be fantastic for FC Edmonton next year or in 2017. The buzz and the extra ticket sales that would mean would be huge for the club. But I don't want to get ahead of myself. The last thing I want to see is the last chance for the Ottawa-Edmonton rivalry to be lost. So I think all those things have to be in consideration. And the other thing, and again, this is what's really dangerous about a rumor, because we know players listen to these things and coaches listen to these things. And the second that we're going to start talking about it, players in the Ottawa Fury and FC Montreal and their coaches are going to wonder, well, who survives and who doesn't, and which coaching staff survives, and all of those things. And that's really unfair. And that's what happens when rumors get launched like this. And I mean, I've heard it whispered, but nothing confirmed. But if the other thing is, if true, this is a huge blow for the Canadian Premier League. It's a kick in the shins, because this is if you're looking to avoid moving to the Canadian Premier League, affiliating with an MLS team is the best, because that way you get to stay in USL. Is the best way to do it. So all of those things would be out there, and the balls are out there, but there's nothing confirmed, and it could just be something that's out there because people are talking about FC Montreal and their potential move or relocation or demise. I do think, though, that TFC, Vancouver, and Montreal, as well as Seattle and Portland and New York, have got to get their affiliate teams out of those markets. They need to be playing somewhere else. They need to play somewhere else, close by, that you can get there on a quick flight or a quick bus trip even, but they got to get into a market that's going to embrace them, that's their own team.
And just to finish there, Ottawa would fit the description perfectly.
That's the problem, right? And I mean, that's what's going to fuel the rumor. It's a nice, easy, handy run from Montreal. And I just think, though, and I'm not going to speak, if I was an Ottawa Fury fan, I think the move to USL is fine. And honestly, I'm not anti-USL. I think a lot of people mistake because I cover a team in NASL that they must inherently be anti-USL. In fact, I have applauded them many times for being the only league that has always treated Canadians as domestics league-wide, and I think they deserve credit for that. I think they've given Canadians a better chance to play than the other leagues. I think we've seen that with teams like Swope Park Rangers and the Rochester Rhinos, where a lot of Canadians were playing last year. I think, again, with that, I just talked about how important it was to get those teams away from those markets and create them as their own entities. But at the same time, I think if you're an independent club like Ottawa, it might feel a little bit subservient. And I think the biggest thing to have to sell the fans is if that would mean down the road, no Voyageurs Cup. I think that's a big thing for Ottawa, that chance to play and the chance they had to play the Whitecaps last year and how close they got to the upset. I know what it's like in the Edmonton side to be that close to the upset where you get, so close that you can taste it and maybe getting to the final and how important that is for your club. I think that would be the consideration. That would be the consideration I think that might prevent this from happening and may be a rumor. But right now it's in the realm of rumor. And I'd like to leave it there for now. I'm certainly asking questions about it, but no one has confirmed anything. And we'll know more. I think Montreal is going to speak at the end of the week a little bit more about what they're doing USL wise. And, eventually the Fury and the CSA are going to have to talk about what's, gone on in terms of their approval process for USL for next year.
Yeah, a lot of balls in the air, Stephen. I do agree with you pretty strongly, having watched TFC2 for the last couple of years, that the best thing for that team and for the players and for the development is to get it maybe just to Kitchener-Waterloo or London or something like that. I think that would make a lot of sense. But let's move on and to look at this at a slightly different level. You mentioned the big difference between your two teams and your standalone teams, the terms that we've used over the years, and sort of how that looks for a league like USL. And I hate to bring the elephant in the room up, the promotion relegation elephant in the room, and it's obviously never going to go to Major League Soccer, at least not anytime soon. But is there room within that model in USL in your mind to have some pro-rel between sort of a Division 3 and a Division 2, where you have maybe the option to have those development teams playing in the third division? And if one of them wins the league, maybe they can choose to be promoted to the second division at that point, to allow teams like Tampa Bay, to allow teams like Rochester, Sacramento, teams like that are a little bit bigger, a little bit more established in their markets, sort of compete at a different level within the same structure of USL. Do you think that would be possible?
Doors box. Because I think once you start pro-rel at some point, and because USL is affiliated with MLS, it puts more pressure on a league that doesn't want it. And honestly, as much as, people can read what I write and know what my opinion is about certain things MLS does, I do first respect that they're a private business and they're an entity and they're a group of franchises, and they can protect their business whatever way they want, just like anyone else can try to protect their business interests the way they want. They're not a public corporation, or they're not like a public entity. They're not a government entity. They're a private business, and so they protect themselves the way they want. And that's the way I look at it in the pro-rel debate. There's federations involved, but at the same time, there's private businessmen and women, and they can do as they choose with their money. If you want to start pro-rel, get a couple $100 million together, start your own league. So so anyone who has those pro-rel things out there, I say, mortgage your house, put your life savings into it, put your money where your mouth is. If you really believe in pro-rel, but just tweet, you don't really believe in pro-rel. If you mortgage your house and put together a team, then you might believe in pro rel. I believe in that. Then I'll believe you. Then when you guys are starting to cough up millions of dollars and put them on the line for that, I will be all behind you. I would actually be right behind you guys. But anyway, that's an aside, and that's how I feel about these things. But I just think you open up a Pandora's box if you start pro rel at one level, and then you create that monster in the room. Are you recreating the MLS Reserve League, which the MLS does not want? Yeah. All of a sudden, if you say, wow, there's a third division for the reserve teams and the second division for everyone else. Well, what we have here, folks, is MLS Reserve League, not really. So why is MLS involved in USL again? I think that to go forward, I think that you do need to create some own entities for teams. Maybe share some affiliations where teams like both put players on a team, and create more loan situations and less sort of developmental. But I also think that I think with this hybrid, it was always going to be this kind of problem, and I think USL would have had their eyes open that this is going to be the issue. Like, I don't think you're going to make Seattle stop playing at Starfire, or Portland not really generate the kind of buzz that they do for two, and honestly, that's an issue for if FC Edmonton were to move. Let's say in some miracle, somehow the CSA or someone, if NASL were to fall apart, if that FC Edmonton were to jump into a league, to USL, I don't know if it's as much as sell like that the Whitecaps farm team. I know the USL hates when we use the term farm team, but that's sort of what it is. The reserve team, Whitecaps 2 and Seattle 2 would come to Edmonton. I don't know if that sells a lot of tickets. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. And it certainly doesn't sell the tickets the Cosmos did. I'd be the first one to say there's huge difference in ticket sales in Edmonton when the Cosmos came to town. As much as people can laugh at the brand and such, they were always the biggest gates of the year. So the fact is it hurts, I think, those teams, and I think it's a little bit unfair to them. I think that the middle ground, unfortunately, is that maybe these MLS teams have to run these teams just a little bit more as clubs and less as affiliates, which will cost a little more money, which I don't think anyone wants to spend extra money, but that's the way it would go. Just at least to they got to get rid of the Wednesday afternoon games. Like, those ones are just killers. Like, you just got to get rid of those, and try to give a little more stability. But that's going to be the big issue for USL going forward, juggling Sacramento and Cincinnati and that are drawing great crowds and really developing great club presences, going against some teams that barely draw flies because they're in the MLS market and they're seen as the secondary product.
Yeah, it's hard to market Whitecaps 2 v Edmonton when Edmonton's actually played the actual Whitecaps, right? Like, that's something that it's hard to wrap your head around, exciting people in that market. The hardcore fan, of course, but the hardcore fan is not enough, as we well know.
And I've said this over and over to people. Edmonton and Ottawa are cities in that dangerous sort of mid-market, what I call the mid-market range. Cities in the 1 to 2 million population pocket, where they have some major league teams, that they're NHL cities. They see themselves as major league cities. So selling something as minor league now becomes almost insulting to them now, where it's like, what, you want to bring us another minor league team? I'm the first person to say that if Edmonton had an MLS team, they get 18,000, 20,000 up to the stadium, no problem. Even in the winter, it'd be no problem, because then they would be seen as playing in the big leagues. It's just like, it's not like the Oilers or Flames or Senators really have that much trouble drawing crowds, even when they're bad. Let's face it, the Oilers have been bad for a long time. This year's, wonderful turnaround, and they still got, we're getting great crowds out. Not just because people love hockey in this market, but it's also because the fact is that the perception of the city's major league is important. And the perception is that it is on that level with, Toronto and Montreal and Los Angeles and New York is really important to the city's psyche. And these mid-market cities are really dangerous when you start openly doing things that are minor league. I think that sabotages, and you just can't work. You can't work here. I do think that's it's a dangerous thing, and these cities now they want more, and they want to play with the big boys, and they don't necessarily want to be seen as secondary markets.
Time is our enemy, but Stephen, I did want to get your insight on one last thing. We'll move away from the NASL stuff. As we talked about off the top, it is MLS Cup week here in the city of Toronto. For those that don't know, Stephen covered TFC in the early days. You've seen it at its lowest. At any point during that stretch, Stephen, did you ever envision this club figuring it out to the extent that they have, to the extent that they are now one home win away from being the MLS Cup champion? Did that ever cross your mind back then?
I think sure. I think if Toronto FC had played in the league that didn't have the parity that MLS does, the fact is that you'd see it as a longer struggle. But let's face it, the difference in MLS between like a really bad team and a really good team is about 4 wins a season. This is a league where top teams never win, like in terms of at the standings. And let's not forget the fact that the top 2 teams in the East standings wise and the top 2 teams in the West got nowhere near this trophy this year, as you sort of expected. I actually halfway through the season thought Seattle was the team to beat, because Seattle fills, I hate to say this, every part of MLS Cup's sort of template for a winner, which is a team that's highly regarded at the start of the season, has a terrible start to the season, really struggles, so therefore has to tinker. And teams that tinker tend to do really well come playoff time, because they kind of figure it out. They get hot. They brought in Ladero. He changed the team. They changed the coach. Changed things up, and then got hot. Got hot late in the season where they had to win they had to just for their playoff lives get in there. Just like Portland last year, just like Real Salt Lake a few years ago. Unfortunately, I hate to say it, this is the model to win. You hope that for Toronto's sake it doesn't last another game, but the fact is that's the template. So therefore, it's not hard to see anyone. It wouldn't have been that hard to see Montreal win MLS Cup for that particular reason as well. The eventually, as much as parity is awesome, because I get it, eventually the league will have to figure this out. That down the road, it can't always have the 3, 4, or 5 seed playing another 3 or 4 or 5 seed in MLS Cup. Eventually, you water down the league so much that people see it, and that's why the league is so ignored for the first 4 or 5 months of the season, because everyone knows that March, April, May, June are just extensions of the preseason. The games don't mean anything. If you care about a game in May, like that, it bothers you, your team is still tinkering. You're worried more about the tinkering. And in fact, the teams that tend to struggle are the top teams that think they haven't figured out in April or May and don't tinker. And because everyone else figures them out by the time the playoffs run around. It's a really weird psychological thing. So yes, I could definitely see Toronto doing it. Maybe not with the same owners, but yeah, they've done it. And I think credit to Tim Bezbatchenko for figuring out a way to somehow do what no one else in MLS has been able to figure out to do, which is to have depth and DPs at the same time. Generally, it's a choice between the two. And, we've spoken to Tim about this, and he's talked about it, that you have to have both. We think in MLS, you have to have a choice, right? That either you're the Galaxy, where you're top heavy and you have no depth, or you're like FC Dallas or Real Salt Lake back in the day, where you don't have any superstars, but man, you've got a bunch of good players in good spots. They're not all household names, but you're strong everywhere. Toronto has somehow managed to balance this in a very cap-strict structure, and credit to them for doing it. And I think I think Toronto is setting a standard for everyone else, a template, sort of that you can have depth and DPs at the same time. And I think that's the big change in it. And I think that will be the sea change, and maybe the influence that Toronto has, or their success has had on the rest of the league going forward. It might change the way how some GMs see the cap, and how you can play with the cap, and how you can play with your roster, because somehow Toronto's been able to do it.
Fair enough. Yeah, and if Toronto does get the win on Saturday and they do keep the core of this group together for another year, you could start talk about in so much as there are such a thing as dynasties in Major League Soccer. They could go deep again for 2 years in a row, but we don't want to irritate.
Let me know how much I hate the overuse of the word dynasty in modern sports. Win 4 in a row before you start using the D word, or like 5 out of 6 years or something like that. I find it drives me nuts when people call the Chicago Blackhawks a dynasty. I'm like, 3 out of 6 is not a dynasty. I know we're desperate in our modern times to have things that are historically relevant, and we all want to, have things that are, this is the history-making moment. So we like to use the D word all the time to describe a team that is good for 2 years. But holy cow, is it overused? It drives me insane.
Yeah, well, also overused our salary caps and fake parity measures, but that's another topic for another day, Stephen. All right, we got to say goodbye for now. Always appreciate your insight. Hopefully FC Edmonton gives you lots to talk about for many more years ahead. We all wish that club well,
and
whatever league they wish to play.
On the field.
Exactly. Stephen Sandor, our plastic pitch, color commentator for FC Edmonton. Thanks again, Stephen.
No problem.
You are listening to Soccer Today, live on SPN Radio. Visit sportspodcastingnetwork.com for more.
Lots of material to sort of digest there, Kevin. In the time that's left in this segment, about 6 minutes, let's sort of look at it a bit more and talk a little Canadian Premier League as well. We guess we should probably talk about the half-assed measure that MLS put forward to address, quote unquote, the Canadians as domestics issue. I think that I'm betraying myself.
You mean the future Canadian as domestics measure? Because right now, I think there's none or one player that's available that fits a description. In the future, it might help for the 3 academies, Sigma, and what's going to happen in the NASL USL actually has some correlation to this as well. What if FC Montreal, because they were kind of homegrown from that academy, a lot of things are going to change. But yeah, Canadian Soccer, MLS, and the Canadian Soccer Association and Major League Soccer have come to an agreement for a better promotion or a better Canadian Canadian representation in the next few years, though.
Yeah, look, we'll see how it plays out. You're right. I called it the Rocco Romeo rule, which no one knows who Rocco Romeo is unless you've listened to the show dedicated week in, week out, and heard me mention him a couple times. He's a tall, lanky, 15-year-old defender for the TFC 2 TFC Academy group in Ligue 1 Ontario. Sorry, I don't think he played for TFC 2 at all this year, but he was the TFC Academy thing, guy that I'm pretty high on prospect-wise. But that's what you're talking about. We're talking about 14, 15-year-olds right now, that if they develop into something, then maybe that would do it. In terms of the actual players currently in the league, I believe there are 8. The list is out there. Jonathan Tannenwald contributed or got that list. If you look back at his thing in his feed on Twitter, you'll find it. I retweeted it as well. In terms of names, there's good players on that 8 list that are prospects in their own market for a certain extent. But in terms of names that an average MLS observer might recognize, there's 2. There's Jordan Hamilton and Russell Tybert. Those are the 2 that have name recognition in the league that would qualify as domestics now in the United States as well. And Hamilton would probably have some trade value. Tybert absolutely would have some trade value, and that's good for those 2 guys. But that's just put it out there that way. In terms of the immediate effect of this rule, that's what you're looking at. Those couple guys might get a greater opportunity, and good for them. And I'm not upset about that. But
I believe Chouanière and Balou-Tabla for Montreal, and you would have to maybe check out the ruling for other academy signed players from Montreal. But if I'm not mistaken, as of right now, Jean-Yves Balou-Tabla and David Chouanière will qualify as domestics in the United States as well.
Yeah, Quinlan Roberts, Manella, who's a guy that's been on the TFC roster forever that has never touched the field. So there's some guys out there that might get an opportunity out of it, but certainly it is much less. The scope of it is far less. It's far shallower than most of us would have liked. If you haven't heard it, basically what it is if you are in an MLS or a quote-unquote approved academy, and we're not too sure exactly how that approval process would work prior to your 16th birthday, and your first contract you signed was in Major League Soccer, then you would be eligible to be considered domestics or homegrown, I suppose, league-wide. So, look, again, we'll see how this plays out. It is a half measure. It is at least, I guess, a nod from the USSF and from MLS that they need to address this a little bit better. But the USSF continues to be the roadblock in all this. They refuse and claim on labor laws that they can't do it. I disagree with that. There's no point belaboring this. If you've listened to me over the years, you know my position on it. But it is out there. It has changed a few things. And if it gets Russell Tybert out of Vancouver, where I think he's kind of never really found a true role, he's had a half role there for years, and into a place where he could be a regular starter, then hey, that is a small benefit. And Jordan Hamilton, again, is a player that had a nice little stretch with TFC this year, to enough that he probably raise get a few little bit interest from some people. So we'll see. Quinlan Roberts is another player that obviously needs to get out of Toronto and now would be considered a domestic in the United States. So maybe if someone's looking for a young keeper, he might have a chance there as well. So there you go. Kevin, in terms of the Cosmos stuff, what I reported on my Twitter account this year, and this is coming from, I got it from a main source, and then I backed it up from two other people to give you my precise how I went about it. It's pretty well placed, the source that I got it from, that the Cosmos are done, is how it was described to me. They're done. It's over. The players know, the staff know, they're looking for new employment opportunities. They haven't announced it officially yet, because I think they're trying to wrap it up and put it with the entirety of the situation with the NASL. Steven sort of alluded to it. They're still kind of, I think, also looking for a Hail Mary or a white knight to just appear out of thin air. And, I will always keep that 1% open whenever I'm making a prediction or a report like this. There's always that possibility of a last-minute shift, a last-minute change. But things are pretty bleak, and it has to do with the fact that there's a lot of debt there. We don't know if it's $30 million or not, but there's a lot of debt, and it is a tough situation. And losing that branding, that Cosmos branding, would be significant. But it's perhaps at this point, if there truly is $30 million worth of debt, their only choice they would have would be to go bankrupt. Or
Duane, yeah, it is Christmas times, and miracles do happen sometimes. But in this particular case, I don't think we will see the White Knight.
No, it seems unlikely, because because what do you do? And we sort of alluded this to the other day, is the NASL's at a crossroads. They have to figure out what exactly they are and what the purpose of it is. Okay, you could spend all that money, but to what end? There is no promotion and relegation. We know that, and this would be the argument that the pro-rel folks would put out there, is that you're dissuading if you had pro-rel, lots more people would emerge to spend $30 million. I don't necessarily agree with that. That's, of course, their argument. I just don't know what the end is. The NASL glory, Cosmos have won the title 3 times now. It's not helping them in attendance. It's not helping them with anything, because they're there. They're stuck there. And I get that. The business realities, the economic realities sort of prevent an open system, in my opinion. My opinion is well stated on that, so we'll leave it well enough alone. We'll see. I hope that something can happen with NASL, particularly for FC Edmonton. And quickly, with just quick in a minute or so here, I don't understand Tom Faith's stubbornness to continue to ignore the possibility of joining the Canadian Premier League. It seems misguided to me. It seems like he's going to walk a plank and take the entire Edmonton soccer community with him into the ocean when he drowns with this league. But that's what seems to be the case here. And we're seeing reports today. Anthony Tatera reported that there are 12 markets that have put interest out there. I've heard some of these markets before. The problem with it that I'm seeing right now in terms of this, and to be clear, Anthony says in his report that it's coast to coast, but what I'm seeing, not to contradict to Anthony, is more of a cluster in a couple parts. The prairies and in Ontario, and the interest in BC and Quebec particularly is a little tougher to find. And kind of you need, if you're not going to have a team in Quebec, you at least need a team in Ottawa to have some kind of French presence, in my mind.
Yeah.
And not so far, not so good.
No, exactly. So it'll be very interesting to, we say that often, but the next week in lower division news will be quite insightful.
And we will have to track down the Fury to Impact stuff, which is new to us today, too. We learned of this morning.
Well,
we haven't had a chance to even...
It actually makes sense to what I've been hearing for last week, of a possibility of a relocation, possibility of ownership change now with this Ottawa. And it would actually make sense. It would answer some questions that we had about the Ottawa Fury in USL. What about the Voyageurs Cup? What about the willingness to save costs and not necessarily manage the soccer operation. And for Montreal, it's the exact opposition, where Montreal didn't want necessarily to go all out in managing a club. When it's part of the pyramid, it's fine. But when you're trying to grow that bigger, you don't necessarily want to allocate resources solely to that quote unquote reserve club to the detriment of the first team. So it would probably answer both of Montreal and Ottawa's desires going to the future.
I don't know if it answers Ottawa's fans' desires, but that's a different topic altogether.
We didn't, yeah, exactly. OSCG and the fans are two different entities, right?
Yeah, exactly. All right, lots to talk about there. Maybe we'll leave it for today. We'll take a quick break now. I'll come back with a few bits and bytes, move a little bit overseas for a little bit. There was some big games in Europe this week, and we'll talk about the TFC ticket stuff.
And some breaking news, too, right after the break.
Okay.
The bits and bytes on Soccer Today. Duane, I teased the breaking news.
Mm-hmm.
Manchester City and Chelsea have been charged over player behavior. So some fines were laid down by the FA today concerning Saturday's game that finished 3-1 for Chelsea.
Okay, I guess maybe we could start with that game. Not that I want to, but we can. Yeah, no, certainly Sergio Aguero didn't cover himself in glory at the end of the game. I can say that, freely as a admitted Manchester City supporter. It wasn't the best way to end it. A lot of frustrations came out there. There's a lot of history within some of those interactions that were happening there, and Aguero's going to get a 4-game sit down. Fernandinho will probably get 3, so we'll see. I don't know if those numbers have been confirmed yet.
Not for Fernandinho, but for Aguero, absolutely. It was confirmed earlier today that it's 4-match ban for him.
Yeah, second red card. It was pretty much always going to be 4. Look, I mean, it was a defining day. That's turning back to the attention of the game. City, Costa and what he's doing with Chelsea, first off, it's making Mourinho look pretty bad. You got to say that off the top that he's been able to turn this team around. There's 8 wins on the trot now, I believe, and they are top of the table, particularly with Liverpool choking up the bit after the City game as well.
Bournemouth.
That was a fascinating game altogether. But in terms of what they did and stylistically, it was a fascinating game. Remind me a little bit of how Leicester won the title last year, actually. And I'm wondering whether with better talent, Chelsea has sort of looked at that model and said, okay, well, let's stylistically play this way a little bit, try and beat teams on the counter, try and get out there and get numbers up forward, get advantages on these breaks, and sort of try and counteract the sort of ticky-tacky possession-based football, which has ruled over the past decade or so. And we're seeing sort of a change in a lot of thinking. And football runs that way, right? You'll go through an era where one thing is working, and then somebody will figure out a way to break that down, and suddenly everyone's going to go that way too. And a lot of what I saw Chelsea do, as I said, reminded me of Leicester last year. So you have to think this team's pretty dangerous here. City looked the better team for large portions of that game, except when they didn't have the ball for the 40% of the time, and Chelsea was dangerous. And that was clear. And that, I'm not dismissing Chelsea when I say that. I'm saying that they're smart to go out and do that. And City, I think, and Pep have to figure out this moving forward. I think Pep has to figure out the difference in the English game moving forward too, because I think some of his vulnerabilities have been showing in the last little while.
No, exactly. And I think it reflects really well on Antonio Conte. Because if you look back on Conte's career at Juve.
Costa, I meant Conte, yeah.
Yeah, no, but if you're looking at Juve and you're looking at the Italian national team over the last 6 years, okay? Even with Juve, he wasn't at a big club, but not necessarily the biggest budget, and was able to get the most out of it with deep runs in the Champions League and a good European presence and winning the Scudetto on multiple occasions. And then he did the same with the Italian national team. When you look at it on paper, the Italian national team wasn't necessarily comparing to a Spain or to a Germany, but because of the way Conte had them set up, they went for a deep run as well. So you do have those effectiveness of Conte. You add this with him having a little bit more budget, more support, and better talent, better skills in his player pool, and finding players that he gives a second chance, like the Victor Moses of this world. You do see a lot of potential with this Chelsea team.
Yeah, look, and you mentioned the Scudetto and you mentioned the Serie A success there. I think that we, in the Anglo and Franco world, in Kevin's case, maybe the Anglo world, I'll speak for myself, tend to dismiss the Serie A a little too easily and success there. You kind of look at Juve and go, well, I could kind of manage them to the title. And perhaps they do have a lot of advantages right now. But certainly he's come over here and shown right away that he adjusted to the English game maybe quicker than Pep. Maybe, Mourinho has been in the English game before, but certainly.
And he won, let's not forget, Mourinho won the league a year and a half ago.
Yeah, true enough. Yeah. Mourinho is a fascinating one. I think United, the problem there is it's a talent problem. And that's just the bottom line. And I don't know whether I think United fans are beginning to see that as well, that they understand that it's not necessarily a manager that's been causing the problems the last few years. It's just they don't have the same talent level that they're used to. And it's showing. I mean, they're still battling for a Champions League spot. Yes. So it's not like they're terrible.
But it might be us too. Not us, but I mean, the way this squad was built or the way that players were gotten, maybe because of their reputation, they were a little bit over appreciated and maybe overrated. And coming into the level that the league is now, we're seeing the deficiencies with United squad.
Yeah, well, Ibra, I think, is the primary case.
Even
there.
Pogba, he shouldn't be the most expensive player in the world, Wayne, at all.
Yeah, it's a lot of as I said this before, and I've said this in multiple shows as well, that I think that one of the United, I don't know, we're on another United conversation here, that they've gone away from their ways, that they've forgotten who they are, and they're going for a lot of sizzle and not so much steak anymore. And that, as a City fan, I'm going to laugh at that a little bit, pardon with my partisan hat on, but as an observer, as a detached observer, if I take a step back, I can recognize that that's kind of a sad thing, because United had, was a very special program that did a lot of things that are quite remarkable over the years. And I think that if you look at their history, they never would have made some of these signings that they're making currently, because I just think that the ownership and the change in their philosophy and their desperation, they're bringing Mourinho back in, they're signing Pogba for billions, not billions, but you know what I mean? They're bringing a guy like Ibra in his 30s, which is an absolute desperation role. And damn well that they all in their back of their mind think they're going to somehow get Ronaldo back and he's going to change everything, but they're going to be getting him back after he's done past his prime too. So that's kind of the way that they're going now. And it's more like, it's like a nouveau money club. It's like City was 5 years ago, that they're just trying to bring big names in to hope that they can jumpstart themselves rather than go the long grind of building your own thing. And I think that that's traditionally where United's been successful and where they'll be successful again. They do have that brand. They do have that cachet that no one will ever take from them, but they need to sort of reevaluate and become closer to what they are. They need to find themselves again if they're going to be successful. Otherwise, I think they're just going to flounder around where they are for a few more years. And if I put my partisan hat back on, that's great. However, a lot of people will disagree, and I understand that. And here we are. I didn't think we were going to talk about United today, but I just did again.
A Classico yesterday, Duane. We've seen a 1-1 draw with Sergio Ramos getting the equalizer late in the game.
Yeah, that was a nice little after the Chelsea City game on Saturday. I decided that I needed to get out of the house for a while, so I walked over to Scallywags, the famous Scallywags here in Toronto, and I had quite an enjoyable day watching that game. Had some breakfast. Enjoyed sort of what was very. It's interesting to watch El Clasico outside of Spain. I haven't watched it in Spain, but I would assume outside of a place where the partisans are sort of divided, because you have that intermix. There's a big patio at Scallywags. There's Real fans. There's Barcelona fans. They're all intermingling. Everyone's having breakfast. There's having little kids sipping little cappuccinos. It was a very kind of enjoyable morning. The game itself, until the last 20 minutes, was kind of bland. It wasn't really the best El Clasico I've ever seen. Certainly,
it was nicknamed on Twitter El Blasico for the first 60 minutes.
Yeah, it was pretty dull. There hasn't been a scoreless El Clasico, I think, in something like the last 25 or something like that. I'd have to look that number up precisely, but there's usually goals in it. And finally, when they got the breakthrough, Iniesta coming on, I think was a huge part of that. And he's his injury, thankfully, seems like he's recovered from it. But once he came on and sort of changed things, it got Barcelona on the front foot, and it looked like it was Barca's day, and they were going to close the gap down to 3 points. Suddenly, that seems like it's game on for the title chase. But then, boom, in the stoppage time, unbelievable header, unbelievable end to what, again, was El Blasico, if you want to call it. But certainly the end of it was anything but, and a very exciting game that lived up to the hype. And that's all anyone's going to remember, is that last 20 minutes, and particularly that goal in stoppage time, which, in the nature of the Spanish La Liga title chase, big, huge. That might have won it for them, as stupid as that sounds, because those teams don't lose very much, right? And for Barca to drop 2 points at home to them, hey, that could be it. So there you go.
Exactly. So it'll be interesting to see where Atleti falls into in that conversation for the title this year in La Liga. But to finish the show, Duane, we alluded to it on Friday. MLS Cup tickets, supporters of TFC, tickets go on sale in about less than an hour. The pre-sale has started 30 minutes ago, and the to the public open sale will be happening in a little less than an hour as we are doing this show live. But what can you tell us about that situation?
Yeah, look, and there's some articles on CBC. I may get a guest on later in the week to talk about their frustrations around it. It is a difficult situation for all involved. For those that don't know, Major League Soccer takes over the running of the game even though it's at the host site, it's still an MLS run event, right? So that means that they have sponsors tickets that they need to get rid of. That means there are more away tickets that are made available. That ultimately means that you're displacing season ticket holders, particularly when you're in a stadium like BMO Field, which has, well, in last counted, there's 17,500 season ticket holders, full season ticket holders. And when you include partial packs, you're getting over 20,000. So there's a lot of seats that are normally accounted for between every game that TFC plays. And suddenly you have to take some of them. You have to take some good ones too. Like the tickets in section 123, which is the fancy section, the prawn section, if you prefer. Like they're pretty much displaced all the season ticket holders there. And those guys are in turn going to then, what they had is they're still getting a ticket in the stadium, but they have to pick a different seat, which in turn displaces someone else. Then they have to take a seat, then that displaces someone else, and so on and so forth. So what's happening is a lot of fans are getting moved from where they're used to watching the game. On the surface, that doesn't necessarily seem like a big deal. And it hasn't been as big of an issue when you have less season ticket holders, but when you have as many as TFC did, a lot of people that have had the same seats for 7-8 years, have sat beside the same people for 7-8 years, are having that changed in the biggest game they'll ever watch. They're no longer where they're comfortable. They're no longer in the same viewpoint. They're no longer with their friends. And that's the most important thing that's really upsetting people, is because it's a social event going to a game. It always is. And you get to know people and you become friends with people. And it's kind of a disappointing thing. Now, I just don't know what the answer was, though. And that's the unfortunate thing. Other than MLS getting its head out of its ass and not doing this to the host city. It's going to have it a host city. Why don't just have it as a host city? Like, do you need to bring your sponsors? Does the CEO of Audi need to have a seat in the best part of the stadium for the final? I don't know. That's maybe the answer to it. But as long as they're going to do that, I don't know what the answer is in terms of TFC's perspective to make this less disruptive to people. But there certainly are a lot of frustrated people out there. It's kind of a sour way to start an MLS Cup week, because people are feeling like that their needs aren't being considered, that they're an afterthought. You know, we hear all the rhetoric over the years of the fans being the key. You know, the fans are the greatest at TFC, and they're what matter. What made the franchise relevant in the early years when they couldn't win, and then suddenly they get to the MLS Cup final and they don't longer matter, because you got to get the CEO of Audi in there, right? And that's disappointing to a lot of people.
Yes, exactly. All right, just it's MLS Cup week. We were saying, when I'm traveling to Toronto on Thursday. So Thursday, there won't be any live shows. The rest of the week, we are live at 11. On Friday, studio will be in Toronto for the MLS Cup. Look for special guests and more coverage and special shows. MLS Cup weekend. And
all right. And on that note.
And until tomorrow, 11 a.m. for Soccer Today. Well, have a great soccer. You were listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us, sportspodcastingnetwork.com.